Tobias Redmont's life was a melancholic painting brushed with strokes of loneliness and past sorrow. For 8 long, arduous years he lived in reclusion, completely shut off from the outside world. His isolated ranch, nestled deep within desolate hills, was not just his home, but a lonely fortress, a self-imposed prison where he buried painful memories. Each passing day, Tobias's only companions were his gentle horses, and the wind howling through the cracks, their monotonous sounds becoming a sad melody for a hardened soul. He had abandoned all human contact, no longer wanting to be involved with anyone or anything that could reopen the scars on his heart. This eerily quiet life had transformed Tobias into a ghost, existing without truly living a part of the wild landscape around him. Yet this haunting peace was abruptly shattered on a fierce stormy night, as if nature itself was screaming in tune with the tempests within him. Rain lashed against the wooden door like bullets, each drop a reminder of nature's brutality, of why ordinary people always seek shelter when storms rage. Tobias sat by the fireplace, his calloused hands carefully mending an old bridle, a repetitive task that offered small comfort in his dull days. His mind was drifting in aimless thoughts, when suddenly an unusual sound cut through the stillness. A knock at the door. It wasn't the polite knock of a visiting neighbor, but a rapid, desperate series of knocks carrying a heartbreaking urgency. Tobias's hand froze, the bridle still caught between his fingers. A cold panic rose within him. "No one comes to my ranch anymore," he told himself. "No one, since I cut all ties with the outside world." The knocking came again, harder than before, accompanied by unfamiliar voices. Tobias immediately recognized the language. Apache. A chill ran down his spine, not from fear, but from a terrifying obsession from the past, flooding back. The last time he heard that language, his wife and daughter were still alive. The last time strangers came knocking at his door in the night, the next morning, he had to bury everything he held most dear. The memory of a fateful morning when betrayed trust had cost him everything stood out vividly. Instinctively, his hand unconsciously moved towards the rifle hanging above the fireplace, a familiar gesture from sleepless nights when sleep only came with one eye open. Yet something stopped him. Perhaps it was the cadence in those voices, not battle cries or threats, but sounds almost pleading, imploring. Perhaps it was the way the storm wind carried their fragmented, desperate words. Or perhaps a cold realization flickered in Tobias's mind. True warriors usually don't announce their arrival by knocking. He cautiously approached the heavy oak door, each step carefully calculated. Through the thick wood he could hear the voices more clearly. A woman's voice whispered urgent. Then a voice rang out more clearly than all the others speaking English, with a hard tone, as if each word was carved from stone. "Please, we know you're there. We need shelter just for tonight." Tobias pressed his palm against the door, feeling the vibrations of their voices transmit through the wood. 8 years of solitude had taught him to trust his instincts, and right now, every instinct screamed danger. But not danger from the women themselves, but from something that had pushed them to his doorstep in a storm that could kill a man in minutes. He thought of Sarah, his late wife, how she used to scold him for his suspicion of strangers, how she said kindness was the only thing that separated humans from animals. But Sarah was dead, and kindness died with her on a morning when he had trusted the wrong people. The voice came again this time, closer to the door, as if the speaker had pressed her face against the wood. "They're coming. If you don't help us, we'll die here, and when they find our bodies right outside your gate, you'll die too." Tobias's hand hovered over the iron door bolt. For 8 years he had never unlatched it for anyone. But there was something in that voice, a certainty, that twisted his gut, signaling that tonight, everything was about to change. Because somewhere in the darkness, beyond his ranch riders were approaching, and once they arrived, there would be no turning back to the life he had built in the shadows. The heavy iron bolt felt heavier than usual. As Tobias finally lifted it from its brace, 8 years of rust and fear seemed to resist his decision. But the desperation in the woman's voice had cut through his defenses like a knife through paper. Tobias's heavy oak door groaned open, revealing a sight that would haunt him for the rest of his life. 10 Apache women huddled on the porch, their traditional clothes torn and mud-splattered. On some fresh wounds still bled, forming dark, sinister streaks against the wet fabric. The youngest girl, no older than 16, trembled, clutching a small cloth bundle that stirred gently, a baby struggling for breath in the biting cold. The oldest among them, with dark hair threaded with silver, had eyes that had witnessed too much death, eyes etched with untold pain. But it was the woman who had spoken through the door who captured Tobias's full attention. She stood slightly apart from the others, her chin held high with pride despite the exhaustion etched on every line of her face. Blood trickled from a cut above her left eye, and her dress was torn at the shoulder, but her gaze remained unwavering as she faced Tobias. "I am Ayanna," she said, her English careful but clear. "These are my sisters, my daughters, my people. We have been running for 3 days." Tobias opened his mouth to speak, then closed it. A flood of questions crowded his mind. Where did they come from? Why were they alone? What men were hunting them? But the image of the baby's pale lips stopped his words. There were things more important than answers. "Come in," he heard himself say, stepping back from the threshold. Swiftly they moved like shadows, slipping past him into the warm, main room. Tobias had forgotten his house was so small, with other people in it. For 8 years it had been his fortress, his refuge from a world that had taken everything. Now it seemed to shrink around these women, who carried the scent of rain and fear and something else. The metallic tang of blood, not entirely their own. Ayanna was the last to enter, and as she brushed past Tobias, she spoke in a near whisper. "The soldiers hunting us, they are not far. Perhaps an hour, perhaps less. They will not stop until every one of us is dead." Tobias closed the door and latched it, knowing it was likely futile. His sanctuary had been breached not by force but by a choice, a fateful choice, and there would be consequences. There always were. "Why?" he asked, turning to face Ayanna. "Why are they hunting you?" Her dark eyes found his, and in them Tobias saw a familiar pain, the look of someone who had lost everything and still lived to tell the tale. "Because we ran instead of dying quietly. Because we chose to live when they expected us to accept death. Because some of us fought back when they burned our village and killed our men." The baby in the young woman's arms whimpered weakly, and Ayanna's jaw tightened. "And because one of their officers will not tolerate us living to tell what he did to my youngest sister." Tobias felt something cold settle in his stomach. He knew men like that. Men who wore uniforms but had forgotten the meaning of honor. Men who took what they wanted and killed anyone who could speak of it later. "How many are coming?" he asked. 8, maybe 10, led by a captain named Morrison. "He has been hunting Apache villages for months, claiming us hostile. But his real enemy is anyone who can expose his true nature." Tobias moved to the window, peering through a gap in the windbreak out into the stormy night beyond his fence line. Nothing moved that he could see, but that meant little. Professional killers knew how to move unseen, especially when they thought their prey was cornered. He turned back to look at the women huddled around the fireplace. Some were tending to wounds, while others comforted the youngest. They looked like survivors, not warriors. But he had learned long ago that sometimes to survive a man had to become something he never intended to be. "There's a root cellar under the kitchen," he told Ayanna. "Stonewall's secret entrance. It can hold all of you, but it will be cramped." She shook her head slowly. "If they search and find us, you will die with us. If they find an empty house with signs of recent occupation, they might believe you are not involved. We will not make you an enemy of the United States Army." Tobias almost laughed. 8 years too late for that conversation. Girl, I've been a dead man for 8 years. Ever since the day I decided to survive what they did to my family. The only question now is whether we run, or whether we make them pay for coming here." Something flickered in Ayana's eyes. Surprise recognition, perhaps even hope. Outside, the storm began to wane, and with it the cover that had protected them until now, because from a distance heard only faintly through the fading wind, came the sound of hooves moving through mud, and the low voices of men who thought they had cornered their prey. The sound of hooves grew closer, cutting through the rain like a death knell. Tobias, with the efficiency of a man who had survived by always thinking 3 steps ahead, quickly retrieved his rifle and a box of cartridges from the cupboard. But when he turned back to face the women, an unexpected sight stunned him. Ayana was no longer the desperate refugee who had pleaded at his door. She stood tall, her posture exuding dignity, and in her hand was a gleaming knife, glinting with more than just firelight. The other women had also transformed. Some clutched weapons they had concealed beneath their torn dresses. Others were taking positions with the practiced ease of those who had fought before. "You're not helpless," Tobias said, understanding dawning on him. A cold, obvious truth. He had been wrong. He had thought them victims fragile souls in need of shelter. But Ayana's gaze, the resolve in her every movement, shattered that illusion. "We were never helpless," Ayana replied, her voice carrying a steely edge that matched the metal in her hand. But sometimes it is better to let men think what they want to think. Captain Morrison believes he is hunting frightened women, ones who will cower and beg. He is about to learn otherwise." The youngest woman, the one holding the baby, moved towards the back of the house without prompting, and 2 others followed her. They knew what they were doing, had planned for this moment. Tobias realized he wasn't sheltering helpless refugees. He was housing warriors who were playing a much larger game than he understood. "How many have you killed?" Tobias asked Ayana bluntly. Her dark eyes met his without a flicker of shame. "Enough to know that Morrison's soldiers are not the first to underestimate Apache women. They will not be the last, but they may be the most surprised." Outside, the voices grew clearer. Men calling out to each other in the rain, coordinating their approach. Tobias could distinguish at least 6 distinct voices, perhaps more. Professional soldiers, but operating in a territory they didn't understand. Hunting prey they had entirely misjudged. "The root cellar," Tobias said again, his voice holding a faint glimmer of hope. But Ayana shook her head. "We run now, and they will pursue us forever. We hide, and they will search until they find us. But if we end this here tonight, the hunt stops." Tobias felt something he hadn't experienced in 8 years, the ultimate cold clarity before violence erupts, when survival strips away everything but what needs to be done. These women hadn't come to his ranch by chance. They had chosen this land, this night, this storm. They had brought their fight to his doorstep because they knew exactly what Tobias Redmont used to be. "What do you need from me?" he asked. Ayana's smile was as sharp as her blade. "Captain Morrison expects to find helpless women. Instead, he will find us. But when his men see a white rancher fighting alongside Apache, they will hesitate. That hesitation will cost them everything." A horse whinnied near the house, and the heavy slosh of boots echoed in the mud outside. Someone was moving around the house, checking exits, planning their attack. In a matter of minutes, they would be inside, expecting to find cowering victims. Tobias checked his rifle, ensuring it was loaded. Sarah's voice whispered in his memory, reminding him that kindness was what separated them from beasts. But kindness, he was slowly understanding, sometimes wore the face of violence when it was the only thing standing between innocence and evil. "One more thing," Ayana said quietly. "When this is over, if we survive, you cannot stay here. Morrison's death will bring questions, investigations. They will come looking for answers." Tobias nodded. He had known that the moment he opened the door. 8 years of peace would end tonight. But perhaps that was how it was meant to be. Perhaps some men weren't meant to forever hide from the world. Outside, a voice boomed through the storm, commanding, arrogant, certain of victory. I know you're in there. Come out now, and we'll make this quick." Captain Morrison had arrived, and he was about to discover that some hunts ended with the hunter becoming the prey. Tobias took up position at the front window, while Ayanna and 3 other women spread out across the main room, concealed in the shadows cast by the dying firelight. The remaining women had melted into the back of the house, creating multiple lines of defense that would make any assault difficult. This was no band of desperate refugees. This was a coordinated force that had planned this confrontation for days. "Rancher," Morrison's voice boomed again, "we are pursuing dangerous fugitives. Open the door, or we will assume you are harboring enemies of the United States." Through the windbreak, Tobias could see shapes moving in the darkness. Soldiers were fanning out around his house, taking up positions that would block any escape. Standard military tactics, but they were operating under false assumptions. They thought they were besieging a house full of frightened women, and perhaps a sympathetic rancher. Ayanna appeared beside him, moving so silently he hadn't heard her approach. "The one near the stable," she whispered. "That's Corporal Blake. He was there when they killed my husband, the one near your well. That's Sergeant Hayes. He held my sister while Morrison—" She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Tobias felt something dark and familiar rise within him, the same cold fury that had sustained him through 8 years of isolation. These weren't soldiers anymore. They were predators in uniform, and predators only understood one language. "How do you want to do this?" he asked. Ayanna's smile was as sharp as her blade. "Captain Morrison expects to come through the front door. He always does, wanting to see the fear in his victim's eyes. His men will come through the back and the sides, but they expect to find women too scared to fight, and a rancher too afraid to resist." She handed him something, a small, brightly polished mirror. "When you see the signal, take care of Morrison. We'll handle the rest." Tobias was about to ask what the signal was when a new voice cut through the storm, young, uncertain, unlike the harsh commands they'd been hearing. "Captain, sir, maybe we should just search the place and move on. Could just be an old rancher riding out the storm." Morrison's laugh was chilling. "Private Wilson, those tracks lead right to this door. 10 women moving fast, bleeding in at least 3 places. They're in there, and so is whatever fool was stupid enough to help them. We're doing this by the book. My book." Tobias heard the unmistakable click of rifles being readied, the sound of safeties being disengaged. Whatever was about to happen, it was happening now. The approaching hooves thundered through the rain like a death sentence. Tobias, with the efficiency of a man who had survived by always thinking 3 steps ahead, hastily grabbed his rifle and a box of cartridges from the cupboard. But when he turned back to look at the women, an unexpected sight froze him. Ayanna was no longer the desperate refugee who had begged at his door. She stood ramrod straight, her posture radiating authority, and in her hand was a gleaming knife glinting with more than just firelight. The other women had also changed. Some gripped weapons they had hidden beneath their torn dresses. Others were moving into position with the practiced ease of those who had fought before. "You're not helpless," Tobias said, understanding flooding over him. A stark, chilling realization. He'd been wrong. He'd thought them victims fragile souls in need of shelter. But Ayanna's eyes, the fierce determination in her every move, shattered that illusion. "We were never helpless," Ayanna replied, her voice carrying a steely edge that matched the metal in her hand. "But sometimes it is better to let men think what they want to think. Captain Morrison believes he is hunting frightened women, ones who will cower and beg. He is about to learn otherwise." The youngest woman, the one holding the baby, moved toward the back of the house without prompting, and 2 others followed her. They knew what they were doing, had planned for this moment. Tobias realized he wasn't sheltering helpless refugees. He was housing warriors who were playing a much larger game than he understood. "How many have you killed?" Tobias asked Ayanna bluntly. Her dark eyes met his without a flicker of shame. "Enough to know that Morrison's soldiers are not the first to underestimate Apache women. They will not be the last, but they may be the most surprised. Outside voices grew clearer. Men called out to each other in the rain, coordinating their approach. Tobias could distinguish at least 6 distinct voices, perhaps more. Professional soldiers, but operating in a territory they didn't understand. Hunting prey they had utterly misjudged. "The root cellar," Tobias said again, his voice holding a faint glimmer of hope. But Ayanna shook her head. "We run now, and they will pursue us forever. We hide, and they will search until they find us. But if we end this here tonight, the hunt stops." Tobias felt something he hadn't experienced in 8 years, the ultimate cold clarity before violence erupts when survival strips away everything but what needs to be done. These women hadn't come to his ranch by chance. They had chosen this land, this night, this storm. They had brought their fight to his doorstep because they knew exactly what Tobias Redmont used to be. "What do you need from me?" he asked. Ayanna's smile was as sharp as her blade. "Captain Morrison expects to find helpless women. Instead, he will find us. But when his men see a white rancher fighting alongside Apache, they will hesitate. That hesitation will cost them everything." A horse whinnied near the house, and the heavy slosh of boots echoed in the mud outside. Someone was moving around the house, checking exits, planning their attack. In a matter of minutes, they would be inside, expecting to find cowering victims. Tobias checked his rifle, ensuring it was loaded. Sarah's voice whispered in his memory, reminding him that kindness was what separated them from beasts. But kindness, he was slowly understanding, sometimes wore the face of violence when it was the only thing standing between innocence and evil. "One more thing," Ayanna said quietly. "When this is over, if we survive, you cannot stay here. Morrison's death will bring questions, investigations. They will come looking for answers." Tobias nodded. He had known that the moment he opened the door. 8 years of peace would end tonight. But perhaps that was how it was meant to be. Perhaps some men weren't meant to forever hide from the world. Outside, a voice boomed through the storm, commanding, arrogant, certain of victory. "I know you're in there. Come out now, and we'll make this quick." Captain Morrison had arrived, and he was about to discover that some hunts ended with the hunter becoming the prey. The front door exploded inward as Morrison kicked it open, his rifle raised and ready. But instead of finding cowering women, he found himself staring down the barrel of Tobias's Winchester. For a split second, confusion flickered across the captain's face. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. That moment of hesitation was all Ayanna needed. The mirror flashed in the firelight, reflecting a signal to positions within the house. The storm that had concealed the soldiers' approach now muffled the sound of what came next. The soft rasp of blades finding their marks. The strangled gasps of men dying before they could scream. The wet sound of justice being delivered with Apache steel. Morrison's eyes widened as he realized he had walked into a trap, but the realization came too late. Tobias's finger tightened on the trigger, but before he could fire, Ayanna appeared behind the captain, like a shadow, given form. "This is for my sister," she whispered into Morrison's ear, her blade sliding between his ribs with surgical precision. Morrison dropped his rifle, his hands clutching the wound. But Ayanna wasn't finished. She wanted him to see her face, to know who was delivering his justice. "And this is for every woman you thought too weak to fight." But as Morrison fell, a new sound echoed through the storm. More horses, more voices. Morrison hadn't come alone. Somewhere in the darkness, reinforcements were approaching. And the real battle was just beginning. The sound of approaching reinforcements chilled Tobias to the bone. Through the shattered doorway, he could see torches dancing in the gloom. At least a dozen riders, maybe more. Morrison had been just the vanguard, not the main force. The real army was just arriving. Ayanna pulled her blade from Morrison's chest, her face hardening as she recognized what they were hearing. Around the house, her women emerged from the shadows like ghosts, each confirming what Tobias already knew. Morrison's squad was dead, but their victory had lasted exactly 30 seconds. "How many?" Ayanna asked the woman who had appeared beside her. 15 riders, maybe 20. They heard the shots. They know something is wrong." Tobias felt the familiar weight of impossible choices settle on his shoulders. Fight and die, or surrender and die slower. But as he looked at these women who had turned his sanctuary into a battlefield, he realized there might be a third option, one that required him to become the man he once was, before grief had turned him into a recluse. "The dam," he said quickly, "not to hide but to survive what's coming." Ayanna shook her head. "We cannot outrun that many. They will hunt us across 3 territories." "We're not running," Tobias replied, moving towards a cupboard he hadn't opened in 8 years. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, were things he hoped he'd never have to touch again. Dynamite blasting caps, the tools of a man who used to level mountainsides to build railroads, and later other things when the war demanded it. "My ranch sits on a hill," he explained, his hands automatically preparing the blasting sticks. "The natural drainage runs down both sides. When the spring floods come, all that water has to go somewhere." Understanding dawned in Ayanna's eyes. "The dam." Tobias nodded. "I built it to control floods, but breaching it during a storm like this—" He gestured towards the approaching torches. "That valley will be 10 feet deep in water in a matter of minutes. Anyone caught down there is dead. But you will destroy your home, your land," Ayanna said. Tobias looked around the house that had been his prison for 8 years, then at Morrison's cooling body on the floor. Home wasn't a place anymore. It was a choice, and his choice was to ensure these women lived to see the dawn. "Some things are more important than possessions," he said, echoing Sarah's words from when he'd been too attached to material things. Outside, the voices grew closer. Commands shouted positions being taken. Someone must have found Morrison's body by now, seen the blood, understood that their easy targets had become something else entirely. The youngest woman appeared with the baby, the infant having somehow slept through the fierce deliberation. But now the child was awake, dark eyes wide and alert, as if sensing the tension that filled the air. "Lieutenant Morrison is dead," a voice boomed from outside. "Surrender now, or we will burn your house down and hang the survivors." Ayanna looked at Tobias, her face unreadable. "If we do this, there will be no going back. You will be a wanted man for the rest of your life." Tobias hefted his rifle to his shoulder and picked up the prepared blasting sticks. "Girl, I've been a dead man for 8 years. Tonight I choose to live again." But as they prepared to leave through the back exit, a new sound stopped them cold. The cry of a baby. Not the baby in their arms, but another baby somewhere out in the storm. One of the soldiers had brought a child, because sometimes the worst monsters hide behind the most innocent shields, and the hardest choices are the ones that test how far a man will go to save those who matter most. The distant cry of the baby changed everything. Tobias froze midway to the back door, the blasting sticks in his hand suddenly heavy as lead. Through the shattered frame, torchlight flickered on Morrison's body, and somewhere beyond that light, an innocent child was caught in a war that had nothing to do with them. Ayanna grabbed his arm, her grip firm as steel. "It could be a trap," she warned. "Soldiers have used such things before." But Tobias shook his head. He'd heard too many genuine cries in his life to mistake the true fear in that tiny voice. Someone out there, perhaps one of Morrison's men, had brought their child on a mission they thought would be a simple massacre. Now that child was about to pay the price for their father's sins. "We can't breach the dam," he said quietly. "Not with a baby down there." "Then we all die," another woman hissed. "My daughter's life is as important as that baby's." She was right, and Tobias knew it. But some lines once crossed changed a man forever. He'd been walking the edge of that line for 8 years, and tonight he either stepped back or plunged into the abyss completely. "There's another way," he said, setting the blasting sticks down. "Harder, more dangerous, but it keeps everyone alive." Ayana's eyes narrowed. "Tell me." "We make them think we're trapped, make them overconfident," Tobias explained. "They'll send men in to flush us out, while the rest stay with the horses." He paused. "And whoever brought that baby, that evens the odds to 3-1 against us." "In a fair fight, yes," Ayana said. "But this will not be a fair fight." Tobias moved to another cabinet. This one held items that spoke of a different kind of warfare. Caltraps, iron spikes designed to lame horses. Tripwires that could break a man's neck in the dark. Bear traps that had never seen a bear, but had tasted human blood in times of war. 8 years ago, I made this place a fortress because I was afraid to die. Tonight, we use those defenses to ensure others live. Outside, the voices were organizing. Someone was taking command, likely Morrison's second in command. Orders were given, positions assigned. They had numbers and training, but they were operating in the dark on land Tobias knew like the back of his hand. "How do we split them?" Ayana asked. "We give them what they expect," Tobias replied. "A last stand. Barricade the front, make noise, make them think we're cornered and desperate. Half their force will come in to flush us out. The other half will stay back to guard their escape route." And then Tobias smiled. It wasn't a pleasant smile. "Then we show them the difference between hunting frightened women and fighting people who have nothing left to lose." The plan was simple, brutal, and utterly insane. Ayana and 4 of the women would create the diversion at the front of the house, making enough noise to draw the assault team. Meanwhile, Tobias and the remaining women would circle through the terrain only he knew, targeting the reserve force and hoping to get the baby to safety. "If this plan fails," Ayana said as they prepared to split, "Morrison's death will mean nothing. They will call us savage murderers and use our bodies to justify 10 more raids." "And if we do nothing," Tobias countered, "the baby out there dies for its father's crimes, and you all die for wanting to live. Sometimes the only choice is between bad and worse." The baby's cry came again, fainter, and Tobias felt time slipping through his fingers like sand. Every second they delayed was a second closer to a child's death. Another moment that would haunt him if he survived the night. "Let's go," he whispered. As Ayana and her team took positions at the front of the house, Tobias led the others into the storm through the back door. The rain had lightened, but the ground was slick, and one wrong step would alert the soldiers to their flanking maneuver. But as they crawled through the darkness towards the sound of horses and whispering voices, Tobias realized he'd made a grave miscalculation. The baby wasn't with the reserve force. It was much closer to the house. Somewhere between the 2 groups, meaning to save the child, he would have to walk straight into the line of fire. The baby's cry echoed from a wagon situated between the house and the main soldiers' encampment. As Tobias crawled closer through the mud and darkness, he could make out the shape of a supply wagon. Beside it, a woman was hunched over a small, squirming bundle. It wasn't a soldier's wife. This woman wore the rough clothes of an army follower, perhaps a laundress, or cook forced to bring her child on what they thought would be a simple roundup. Tobias signaled for the Apache women with him to hold their positions while he moved closer. Through the rain, he could hear the woman's desperate whispers as she tried to comfort the crying child. She was trapped between 2 forces about to collide, with nowhere to run and no way to protect her child from what was coming. From inside the house came the sounds of Ayana creating a ruckus. Gunshots, yells, the crash of furniture. The plan was working. In the gloom, Tobias could see soldiers moving towards the house, leaving the supply area lightly guarded. But lightly guarded still meant 3 armed men who would shoot anything that moved. Tobias made his decision. He rose from cover, walking directly towards the wagon. His rifle was low but ready. The nearest guard spotted him, instantly raising his weapon, but Tobias called out in a calm, authoritative voice, "Easy, soldier. Lieutenant Morrison sent me to secure the civilians." The lie bought him precious seconds. In the darkness and chaos, wearing his dark coat, he could pass for a soldier from a distance. By the time the guard realized his mistake, Tobias was close enough that a shout wouldn't draw the attention neither of them wanted. "You're no soldier," the guard said, but his voice was filled with uncertainty rather than alarm. "No," Tobias agreed, and brought the butt of his rifle hard against the man's temple. The soldier dropped silently into the mud. The woman with the baby looked up as Tobias approached, her eyes wide with terror. She was younger than he expected, perhaps no more than 19, with the gaunt look of someone who had seen too much hardship for her years. "Please," she whispered, "don't hurt my baby. She hasn't done anything wrong." "Neither of you," Tobias said softly. "What's your name?" "Mary. Mary Hendricks. I cook for the soldiers, do their laundry. Captain Morrison said it would be safe. Said we were just rounding up some women who stole horses." Tobias felt a fresh surge of anger. Morrison had deceived his own people, turned a cook and her child into unwitting accomplices in murder. Even in death, the man was still ruining lives. "Mary, I'm going to get you out of here, but I need you to do exactly as I say. Can you do that?" She nodded frantically, clutching the baby tighter. "There'll be more gunfire in a few minutes. When it starts, you run for that stand of trees and keep running until you can't hear the shooting anymore. Follow the creek downstream. It leads to a trading post about 5 miles south. Tell them Tobias Redmont sent you." "What about you?" she asked. Before Tobias could answer, the remaining guards spotted him. One shouted a warning while the other raised his rifle. But the Apache women Tobias had positioned had moved, appearing from the darkness like avenging spirits. The fight was brief and brutal. These soldiers expected to face frightened refugees, not seasoned warriors who had been planning their vengeance for days. Within minutes, the supply area was secured, and Mary Hendricks was running into the night with her child, disappearing into the storm's embrace. But their triumph was fleeting. From the direction of the house came a new sound. Not gunfire, but something worse. Silence. Either Ayana's group had won completely, or they were all dead. And over the dying storm, a new voice boomed with cold authority. "This is Colonel Bradley, United States Army. You are surrounded by a full company of soldiers. Surrender now, or we will burn you out and hang the survivors." Tobias's blood ran cold. Morrison hadn't been the real commander. Somewhere in the darkness, a far more dangerous enemy had been watching, waiting, letting others die while he positioned his forces for the killing blow. Colonel Bradley's voice carried the confidence of a man holding all the cards. In the darkness, Tobias could see torches spreading in a wide circle around his ranch. Not the dozen riders they had initially faced, but a full-scale military operation. Morrison had been the bait, and they had all walked straight into the trap. But as Tobias grasped this new threat, he heard something that changed everything. Ayana's voice calling from the direction of the house. "Tobias, we have Bradley's son." The silence that followed was deafening. Even the storm seemed to pause, as if nature itself was waiting to see how this would play out. Then Bradley's voice came again, but now it held a tremor it hadn't before. "Release the boy, and we can discuss terms." "There are no terms," Ayana shouted back. "Only justice. Your men destroyed our village, killed our families, and worse. Now you will answer for their crimes." Tobias moved back towards the house, picking his way carefully through terrain that was now a labyrinth of soldiers and weapons. As he drew closer, he could see the situation more clearly. Ayana's group had won their fight, but at a cost. 2 of the Apache women lay motionless in the mud. Their sacrifice had bought the others a chance to survive. Inside the house, he found a scene that would have been unimaginable an hour before. Ayana stood behind a young man in a lieutenant's uniform, her knife pressed to his throat. The boy and he was only a boy had Bradley's eyes and the exact same aristocratic jawline. But where his father exuded cold authority, the son showed only terror. "He came through the back door," Ayana explained quietly. "Thought he was clever outflanking us while his father's men attacked the front. Instead, he delivered himself to us." The young lieutenant tried to speak, but Ayana's knife pressed tighter against his skin, drawing a thin line of blood. "How old are you?" Tobias asked the boy. 19, came the whispered reply. "The same age as the cook's daughter, who just ran into the night because his father made her a target. The same age as some of the women your captain killed." Tobias stepped closer, studying the boy's face. "Tell me, Lieutenant Bradley, do you know what Morrison was truly doing to those villages?" The young man's eyes darted between Tobias and Ayana. Understanding finally dawned. I thought we were suppressing hostile Indians. Father said they were raiders, that we were protecting settlers." "Your father lied," Ayana said quietly. "We lived in peace until Morrison came. We grew corn, raised our children, and bothered no one. But peaceful Indians don't justify military budgets, do they?" Outside, Bradley's voice boomed again, more desperate now. "I have 60 men surrounding this house. Release my son, and I will grant you safe passage to the territorial border." Tobias almost laughed. Safe passage from a man who had built his career on broken promises and manufactured wars. But as he looked at the young lieutenant, he saw something that gave him pause, genuine shock and growing horror as the boy began to understand what he had been a part of. "There's another way," Tobias said to Ayana, "one that doesn't require his death. He is guilty by association. His ignorance does not absolve him. No, but his testimony could condemn his father." The idea was clear as he spoke it. A colonel's son testifying about a systematic massacre disguised as military action. It would destroy Bradley's career and expose the corruption that enabled men like Morrison. "You want me to betray my father?" the young lieutenant whispered. "I want you to tell the truth," Tobias replied. "The question is whether you are brave enough to face what that truth means." Before anyone could respond, a new sound cut through the night. Horses approaching at a full gallop, and with them commanding voices that were not Bradley's men. Someone else was coming. Someone with enough authority to make a full colonel nervous. Through the broken doorway, Tobias could see new torches. These riders wore different uniforms, perhaps federal marshals or territorial investigators. Someone had been watching Bradley's operations, and tonight's massacre had finally caught the attention of the authorities. As understanding dawned, Tobias realized that they might all survive this, but survival would come at a cost. The truth would have to be spoken, justice would have to be served, and powerful men would have to fall. Young Lieutenant Bradley looked between his captors and the approaching reinforcements, then into his own reflection in the blade still pressed to his throat. "What do you need me to say?" he whispered. 6 hours later, dawn broke over Tobias Redmont's ranch, painting the sky in hues of gold and crimson, a palette seemingly fitting for a night that had ended one war and begun another. Federal investigators had listened to Lieutenant Bradley's testimony with growing horror, documenting crimes that extended beyond Morrison's unit to high-ranking officials in the territorial capital. Colonel Bradley was led away in shackles, his military career ruined by his own son's courage to speak the truth. The surviving Apache women were granted federal protection and reparations for their losses. While no amount of money could bring back their murdered loved ones, it was at the very least an acknowledgement, a thin glimmer of hope for a different future. Tobias stood on the threshold of his shattered home, quietly watching Ayana prepare to depart with her people. The two babies they had saved, both the Apache child and Mary Hendrix's daughter, had survived the terrifying night, though the cost in other lives had been steep. "Where will you go?" he asked Ayana, his voice thoughtful. "North to kin, who escaped Bradley's campaign. We will rebuild, but not here. This place has too much blood in its soil now." She paused, studying his face. "And you, your home is destroyed. Your solitary life is over. The man who lived alone for the past 8 years died tonight," Tobias said softly. A ghost of a smile touching his lips, but it wasn't a smile of sorrow. It was one of release of a burden lifted. Ayana nodded. She was right. The recluse who had hidden from the world was gone, replaced by a man who had remembered there were things worth fighting for, worth sacrificing for, worth living for. "I think I'll head west," he said. "Find somewhere that needs a man who knows how to build things and isn't afraid to protect them." Ayanna smiled. It was the first genuine smile he'd seen from her, one that hinted at the hidden beauty beneath her hardened exterior. "That cook Mary Hendricks, she will need protection until she reaches her family in Denver. The road is dangerous for a lone woman with a child." Tobias understood. His first act as a reborn man wouldn't be to ride towards a new life, but to ensure others reached their own safety. As the Apache women rode north towards a hopeful future, and Tobias prepared to ride west towards redemption, the sun climbed higher over a ranch that had seen too much death and just enough justice. Sometimes the end of a story is simply the beginning of another, and sometimes a man who thought his life was over discovers that he was just beginning. Years later, travelers would tell stories of the night 10 Apache women and a solitary rancher stood against an army and won. But those who lived through that night knew the simpler, far more complicated truth. Sometimes the hardest choice isn't between right and wrong, but between staying safe and staying human. And sometimes when the choice matters most, staying human is the only thing that truly makes sense. And so in that moment of dawn, a hero was reborn. Tobias Redmont was no longer the hermit imprisoned by his pain. He had become the embodiment of the American spirit, a man willing to stand up for what's right, no matter the danger. He had faced the demons within and emerged victorious, not just for himself, but for the innocent lives depending on him. He had opened his heart, letting courage and compassion flow through, once more guiding him forward. As the Apache women rode north carrying hope and unyielding strength, Tobias prepared to head west. It was a journey not just across the land, but of the soul. He would take Mary Hendricks and her child to safety, an act of grace that marked the beginning of a new chapter in his life. Tobias's story is a powerful reminder that even in our darkest hours, compassion and integrity can still shine through. He accepted his destiny, no longer running from it, but facing it with a heart that had been mended. This is a story deeply rooted in the American spirit, about a man who found his purpose again by standing up for the vulnerable. Tobias showed us that kindness and bravery still endure even when we think we've lost everything. Now the question is, what should Tobias do next, once he ensures Mary and her child reach Denver safely? What new adventure awaits him in the vast Wild West? Let's reflect and share your thoughts.